Season 2 of Granblue Fantasy Versus Rising has finally arrived, and I don't think I'm the only one to say that overall the patch actually doesn't have a lot going on with it. The Season 1.5 patch had more substantial changes to the entire cast than this one. However, there are still some important changes to the system mechanics that I would like to go over, as well as addressing some of the more dramatic character changes, each in their own video. For the purposes of going through this formatting, though, instead of compiling all this into one video, I instead want to address the system mechanic changes in this particular video, introduce the format, and then address pretty much the entire cast of characters who are only affected by the universal system mechanic changes. Any footage regarding the old patch is going to be filled in daylight with Gran as the player 2 dummy, unless I need to swap some settings around. Whenever we're going to be talking about the Season 2 patch, we're going to be going to the nighttime stage with Sandalafon as the dummy, unless I need to swap things around again. Let's go over what I consider to be the most important system mechanic change within this patch, and that's going to be the Brave Counter itself. Brave Counter has largely been a slightly controversial system mechanic in the game because of how strong it is. And I'm going to go ahead and try to outline the strengths that this mechanic has in the previous versions of the game. Brave Counter is effectively this game's version of a guard cancel or a dead angle or some system mechanic that you might have familiar with depending on what other fighting games that you play. You input it by using medium and heavy attack while you are in block stun to then perform the strike that will force the opponent off of you. And it looks like that on a successful counter hit. Now, regarding each individual fighting game out there, this version of this mechanic will usually have some strengths and weaknesses. While it's effective against true block string pressure, typically, if you are able to make a read and bait this out, you should be able to maintain your turn. That's the reward for reading your opponent's defensive decision making. However, up until this point in Granblue, that wasn't the case. If you were to run offense against the opponent, stop your block string in order to try and call out the Brave Counter, and you blocked it, as you can see previously, it's actually the Brave Counter user's turn with a +6 frame advantage. This is very unusual because when you compare this to Guard Cancel in Dragon Ball FighterZ, Yellow Roman Cancel in Guilty Gear Strive, or Drive Reversal in Street Fighter 6, typically if you block those system mechanics, you're able to get a punish on the opponent. In Granblue, it's actually now the defender's turn. Obviously, this is a strong situation for a defender to put themselves into, going from being at a disadvantage into an immediate advantage in a quote-unquote worst-case scenario. Most of the time, if this situation were to occur at high-level play, you would often see the players participate in something that I would call a Brave Counter war, which is effectively a game of chicken between the two players to see when do the Brave Counter trades stop? Because sometimes the best answer to blocking your opponent's Brave Counter was to respond with your own Brave Counter to steal the turn back. This is sort of a way of how it would look, and obviously, depending on the spacing and situation, the number of Brave Counters you could effectively use would have to be reliant on the context. But playing this game of chicken where you're spending these resources that you could be using for Raging Strike, increasing the amount of damage that you take, all to just be +6 on block and have it be your turn was kind of ridiculous. And most of the time, players hated this situation. Casters would laugh about the situation. I certainly did whenever I did commentary for Granblue, as well as spectators also just going, look at how overpowered and overtuned this defensive mechanic is. Pretty much in any other fighting game, based on a couple of situations, if you blocked a defensive mechanic like this, you had the punish. In Granblue, that wasn't the case. Outside of character-specific interactions with Brave Counter, there really wasn't a great way of baiting a Brave Counter. If you try to read a Brave Counter and wanted to spot dodge in order to steal the turn back from the opponent trying to use this, well, you would have less than success depending on the timing of your dodge. As you can see here, if I instantly dodge on that and my opponent goes for an instant Brave Counter, I'm only +2 in this situation. I'm gambling a spot dodge, which if my opponent doesn't input a Brave Counter or they delay it and get a Raging Strike, I'm putting myself at a huge amount of risk just to be +2, not even to get a punish on a Brave Counter. Due to the nature of Brave Counter being tied to the Raging Strike input, if you weren't in block stun when you did this input, you would get a Raging Strike, which meant that a obvious counter to Brave Counters was to try and introduce gaps in your pressure, and it would look something like this. So that wasn't all too common. Also, going for a throw in that situation would also beat out the attempt at a brave counter. However, due to the nature of triple attack block strings in Granblue, basically, if you ever did a jab against the opponent, that wasn't a safe brave counterpoint to do so, but it was still worth it to go for a brave counter there because you would be able to still get a +6 on block situation if the enemy did bait it just by blocking it. But once someone commits to a triple strike sequence, it's basically a free go ahead and brave counter me for the opponent because there's no delaying a triple strike. There's no way to introduce a gap in the triple strike sequence without going for a slower special cancel of some kind that generally would mean the end of your turn. Now that I've established that when it comes to a system mechanic, something that every single character in the game has access to, being so hard to have counterplay from a universal standpoint, let's go ahead and talk about how Arxis and Cygames actually nerfed it in Season 2. And that was they removed 8 frames of block stun from this. So now, if you're able to bait out a brave counter by blocking it, it is still your turn. As you can see, Gran is +2, Sandaflon is -2. This completely reverses the risk-reward factor when it comes to pressing Brave Counter against Brave Counter safe strings like these plus on block jabs that the entire cast has access to. And once you do block a Brave Counter, the fact that you're still able to run offense against the opponent is a huge boon. It creates this non-committal way of interacting with this very strong system mechanic and makes players have to be more considerate when they actually try to use a Brave Counter now. Pretty much every high-level competitor that I've seen talk about this change is very much in favor for it. I can appreciate Brave Counter being strong for a system mechanic, considering that unlike other system mechanics that I referenced, like the Yellow Roman cancel, Drive Reversal, Guard cancel, etc., those often compete with a resource that are tied to offensive options, but those have been tied to resources that you can generate over time. Brave Counters are pretty much a finite resource. At best case scenario, you can get access to about 4 of those counters, or points I should say, in a game by using all 3 of them, then using a Skybound Art to regenerate one of those points for yourself. There's a very finite number and you can do. Compare that to Guilty Gear Strive, where as long as you're building up meter, you have access to always using a Yellow Roman cancel, for example. So I get why Cygames and Arxis want this mechanic to be strong, but it's safe to say it was too strong with not enough counterplay to it to reward someone for having a successful read on when the opponent wanted to use a Brave counter in the first place. Pretty much the only change that I see talked about right now from some high-level players at the moment is one more nerf to Brave counter, and that's to its property on hit. Now, if you get a punish counter like this, Gran is pushed back and you're basically reset to neutral, and I think this is fine. However, if I were to do a third triple attack in this string and get counter hit in my startup, that Brave counter turns into a hard knockdown. And depending on the timing of everything, basically if I was able to take control of Sandalphon earlier, you're actually able to side swap on the opponent and get your offense going again. That's a really high reward to have for this option as well, and I think that's the last change that Brave Counter arguably needs in order for it to be at a point where most of the community is happy. Then again, though, I want to stress, I get why Cygames and Arxis want this mechanic to be strong, to incentivize you to use it, and I think that nerfing it on block is definitely a step in the right direction that is going to be greatly received by the community. And I'm curious to see how long it's going to take for high-level players' muscle memory to adjust to the fact that they don't have to engage in that game of chicken with their Brave counters once they block the Brave counter. Instead, they can just run their turn like they did before. The other universal system mechanic change is to invincible reversal techniques, including Skybound arts and Super Skybound arts, as well as armored counterattack moves like Bastion from Anre. Previously, if you baited these reversals, the opponents were in a normal hit state. Great. So basically, you just got a normal punish on them at all times. Now, the character that uses an invincible reversal like this is in a counter hit state upon recovery. This opens up a lot of new ways to increase the combo damage you can get from punishing reversals like this. For example, in the previous patch, a Belial combo that would be used to punish a DP would look something like this. This would be close to what a max damage punish would look like for Belial if he didn't have access to Super Skybound art, for example, or at least the combo that I would use for this. In the old patch, we hit 7,761 damage. Here's how Belial can route for a punish in the new patch. Now we did 8,716 damage, so an increase in roughly 1,000 damage actually. This means that your kill thresholds for punishing someone who goes for these reversals is dramatically increased, making these reversals far more riskier than they were before. There's additional implications for combo routing these DP punishes if your character has a dash heavy attack that has this lethal counterhit property to it. In the old patch, Vira would be plus 10 in this situation, which meant that she had a 2-frame window to linking a close heavy attack to then finish out the combo. There's a 2-frame window that you have after the dash heavy to link your close heavy attack to start the triple attack sequence there. A little bit tricky for me personally, but for an experienced Vira player, this should be something that you get familiar with. In the current patch now, with the additional hit stun you get from this lethal counter hit state, Vira is now plus 14. This means that that 2-frame link that I showed you previously is now a 6-frame link, which should be pretty much easy for any competent fighting game player to hit. While the damage is the same, I have to stress how much easier it is for a Vira player to get this link now, meaning that it's probably a little more viable in a tournament setting for you to get that extra damage from a close heavy without risking dropping the combo if you're a little bit off in your timing. This also means that the opponent recovers in air, you're able to get a lethal counter hit to heavy on them as well, which opens up some new combo routing in case that's the punish route you want to go for. In the old patch, that 2 heavy would just put Gran into a punish hit state, and you couldn't link a fully charged back medium special against Gran. Compare that to now. You could potentially route like this. I'm not sure if it's exactly going to be more optimal than some other combo routings, because if you start a combo against an airborne opponent, you're already having to account for combo limit. But still, it is something there to consider for some utility, especially I think if your character has potential side switches off of a heavy attacks like this. And of course, if your character has a dash heavy attack that would serve as a great combo launcher for you to route into for like optimizing corner carry or just a combo preference, then you also have the room to experiment with new DP punish routes there. Anila doesn't really get anything off of a non-counterhead dash heavy. And now, Anila could choose to use your dash heavy to start a combo to punish reversals. A very basic example, which I apologize for. I don't play Anila, but I tend to see them route into the ultimate flock to the future just like that. So that's just to give you some more ideas. What's actually going to be optimal for your character is going to be something that lab monsters are going to have to cook up. But suffice it to say, there's a lot of potential new combo routing that can result in higher damage punishes against any sort of reversal in the game. I also have to reiterate that this particular change applies to pretty much any reversal style of technique in the game, including skybound arts, super skybound arts, and counterattacks. The only style of reversal where this universal change to the counter hit state has not been applied to is ultimate reversals. I think a few characters have had their ultimate reversals adjusted, though, to be more punishable, but they're not going to be in this counter hit state like we see to medium, heavy reversals or to Skybound Art reversals or other counter moves. It seems like the goal for Arc System Works and for side games this patch was to make it so that these turn-stealing attacks, these invincible reversals or these armored things, have a lot more risk to them since they were pretty strong and relatively safe in the previous patch. And because of that, they've adjusted the behavior of some DPs to either have more recovery after block stunts, so that's easier for you to get some of these punishes, have less pushback so that you're in a closer position to get these punishes, and overall, just trying to make it so that it's more consistent for players to punish these things when they block these moves, as opposed to having to block some of them to get a punish, dodge others of them to get a punish. And so we're going to go down the list of the entire cast to address particular reversals that had adjustments to it to make them easier to punish, starting, of course, with Gran. As some astute viewers might have noticed, they did change Catastrophe, Gran's Super Skybound art, by reducing the pushback on block. Previously, if you block this move, you'd be hard-pressed to get a close, heavy punish. A few steps forward, and I'm at far heavy attack range. I could still get a punish here, but definitely not an optimal one. With the reduced pushback on block, I'm actually able to get a short little walk forward into a close, heavy punish now. This can be a little tricky to do, so definitely make sure that you lab this one out. Ultimately, though, this should mean that you're more reliable to get punishes against Calamity now. The pushback on block of Eternal Ascendancy, Djeeta Skybound art, also had a reduction. Previously, I'd be pushed out into far heavy range, which wasn't really ideal for punishes. This is the behavior now. I'm at close heavy range, which is far more ideal. Katalina's Blades of Frost, her SBA, had increase on recovery on block and on whiff to make it more punishable. Previously, she'd be -10 when against a stand blocking Gran like this. And roughly the same depending on when you spot dodged it early against the third and final hit. The recovery has been increased by 6 frames, and while the examples that side games and arcs give don't match mine, we do see that there is a 6-frame increase in my Gran example. Now she's -16 here. With the increase in recovery, this means that Katalina will be easier to punish, but also you can get even better punish starters against her. That dash heavy punish from Gran was not passable in the previous patch. The medium, heavy, and ultimate versions of Charlotta's Holy Ladder have had an increase in recovery on block. Previously, this could be -8 or -7, meaning that depending on how Charlotta hits you with it, she could be safe depending on the startup frames of your character's close heavy. I had a stand block there to actually get that punish. If I crouch blocked, she was safe. Compare that to the current patch. If I crouch block, she's -15. And if I stand block, she's -16. So this pretty much means that every character in the game should be able to get a close heavy punish on her. And again, with the new counter hit state, you can add in new combo routing as well. The change applies to her heavy and her ultimate, as I've mentioned before. I'll go ahead and demonstrate the ultimate change since that one is slightly different in terms of the numbers. This used to be -8 before, and now it's -16, so double the recovery as it was before. You should pretty much be able to consistently punish this with a great starter now. Her Skybound art and Super Skybound art also have changes to make them easier to punish. In the old patch, she was -20 here, and pushed outside of Gran's heavy slash range. Here's what blocking Brilliant Moon looks like now. She's still negative 20, but close enough for you to link a close heavy on her now. This should make punishing this super pretty trivial now on block. Her Noble Execution, Super Skybound art, also has some changes to it to make it easier to punish on block. Previously, both hits would push you outwards, usually outside of your close heavy range. Now, the first hit will actually pull the opponent towards Charlotta, and the second hit has reduced pushback on block. Again, this means that we're close enough to punish her with a close heavy slash pretty easily, making it far more manageable to punish this move consistently. Lancelot's Skybound art, Wise Flugel, has an increase of recovery by 1 single frame. Previously, on block, it was negative 12. And now, the recovery is negative 13. It's a very minor change, but honestly, this is going to depend on your character, who might have had a possible move that could have punished this, but because it was like 13 frame startup, it was too slow before. Now, you should be able to actually get that punish in. Much more noticeable is the increase in recovery to a Super Skybound art. Previously, if you block this move, Lancelot was negative 10. Now, if you block it, Lancelot is negative 19. This opens up some characters to punish this Super Skybound art with a dash heavy attack. Percival's Super Skybound art also had changes to its pushback. Previously, as you can see, if he fully held it, he could push you back into about this range, outside of Gran's far heavy. Every single hit except for the final projectile now has reduced pushback. So now you should be able to micro walk forward and be able to get a close heavy punish on him. Ladiva's strike version of Maximum Love Bomb has changed recovery. Previously, it was negative 11 on block. And now, it's negative 13. This should open up some new punish opportunities for characters with slower heavies. Metera's Super Skybound art has a change in its pushback. Previously, you were pushed outside of Gran's far heavy range. Here's the new pushback. We're very much within range of far heavy now, and with a negative 20 frame advantage, you can micro walk forward and get a close heavy punish. Metera has a lot of other changes within the patch Season 2 as well, but we'll cover those in our own video separate from this. All of Zeta's Rhapsody follow-ups inherit the counter-hit punish state that the Rhapsody armored state now has in this patch. As you can see previously, we just get a punish counter hit. Compare that to now, where it's that lethal counter hit. I'm only going to show the heavy follow-up here, but you can know that it also applies to the light and medium follow-ups from Rhapsody. Vaseraga's Skybound art has its pushback reduced. Previously, you'd be set into far heavy range with Gran. And now, you're in close heavy range. Zooey's ultimate aerial spinning slash had a couple of adjustments to make it more easily punishable. Previously, she was negative 10. And now, she's negative 15. The hit stop on the final hit has also been increased just to make it more obvious of when the move is ending. So you should be able to get some new punishes here, and punishes overall should feel more consistent against her. Cagliostro's ultimate spare body has a change in its recovery. Previously, she'd be negative 30 here in this situation, but because she teleported back, it could be a little awkward for you to get close enough to get your punish in. Now, there's an extra 10 frames of recovery. This should mean that it's pretty easy for you to walk forward and get a punish now. Her Skybound art, Ars Magna, has two changes, one which I won't be able to demonstrate. That change is that it no longer resets the combo limit on hit. Previously, it was possible for Cagliostro to pick up combos after she used the super before, but now, if you use this in a combo, it ends the combo. There's no more extending afterwards. Now, the change that I am able to demonstrate is going to be pretty much in line with the universal adjustments that we've been talking about for the last couple of minutes, which is now that it's easier for you to punish. As you can see, this would push you back a little bit, just outside of Gran's far heavy range. But now, we're very much within our heavy slash range, so with a little walk forward, you should be able to get a close heavy here pretty consistently. Her Super Skybound art, Everything's Coming Up Cagliostro, also has a change to its pushback. As you can see previously, you were basically pushed back to full screen, meaning that if you wanted to punish this move, you had to dodge it. I'm just going to let this change speak for itself. Night and day difference. Yuel's Eye of the Sparrow, her counter move in her third dance stance, is now in a counter hit state during its recovery. Again, this is pretty much in line with other changes. She has some other changes within this patch as well, but like I said with some other characters, she gets her own video on that later. Pretty much every version of Arm the Bastion, whether it's 5U, 6U, or Jump U, is now in counter hit state after its recovery. So pretty much if you get Anre players to whiff these options, you're going to get a much bigger punish against him than you did previously. Anre's Skybound art also has a change in its pushback. If you let the entire thing rock, you'd be pushed outside of pretty much any normal range. Or at least for Gran. But now, you're very much within range of your far heavy attack, and with the frame disadvantage, you should be able to walk in and get close heavy starters against this super now on block. Similar changes were made to his Super Skybound art. This was the old pushback. Here's the new pushback. Again, very much in the same spirit that we've been seeing throughout the patch. Pushback on block for the fifth and final hit of Acid Rage Hal has been reduced on Eustace's SBA. As you can see, you were pushed into far heavy range. And now, you're in close heavy range. Void Claw's Terminus had its pushback on block reduced as well. Again, very much in theme with other characters, you were pushed back into far heavy range. And now, you're in close heavy range. Vira's Punishment Ray, her Transform Skybound art, also has the same changes applied to it. Her travel distance is reduced and the pushback has been reduced as well. Again, as you can see previously, if you block this, you were negative 30 outside of this range. And now, with those two combined changes, you're very much within far heavy range. So a little walk forward will get you a close heavy starter punish. Beelzebub's Super Skybound art, Chaos Legion, has some adjustments to make it easier to punish as well. They've changed the total number of hits, as well as the pushback on block. Previously, you were forced to full screen, and it did 5 hits, meaning that if you wanted to punish the super, you had to spot dodge it. And now, it only does 3 hits, and the pushback on the final hit has been significantly reduced. As you can see, you have ample time to run forward and get a close heavy with the frame disadvantage that Bubs has here. For right now, we're only going to talk about the changes to Belial's DP as well as his counter. Starting with Give Daddy Some Sugar, there's a couple of behavior changes. Previously, it was only 1 hit, and depending on if you blocked this crouching or standing, you could get different variances in terms of frame data. As you can see, if you blocked it crouching, it was -1, but if you blocked it standing, it was -2. Either way, you were usually outside of throw range. Arcsys and Cygames wanted to remove this discrepancy in terms of this move's behavior in order to make it so that Belial was more consistently losing his turn if the opponent chose to not give Daddy his sugar. So they made it so that there's a second hit on the counterattack now, and that hit will always leave Belial at -4. Additionally, he's now in throw range, meaning that he has to take a strike throw mix-up afterwards as well. This change also applies to his ultimate command throw, which functions as a parry for the first couple of startup frames. Overall, this should mean that it's a lot more risky for Belial to be using these moves in situations where it's not a guaranteed punish. The heavy and ultimate versions of his DP, Notoria, have been made easier to punish as well. Previously, Belial here was -10, but with the little amount of block step that you had there, it could actually be a little tricky for you to recognize the visual cue for when it was your turn to finally start opening up a punish on him. Compare all that to now. He's -14 in this instance, so you have a bigger frame window, can get new punishes in on this DP, as well as with the increased block stop that you see, it's a little more distinct for when it's your turn to go punish him. Making this move a lot more risky. The same changes apply to his ultimate DP. As you can see previously, it behaved just like the heavy version did, -10 with very little block stop. Compare that to now. Should be a lot more easier and consistent for people to punish this, as well as having new punish opportunities open up as well. That's all I'm going to speak on for Belial for now, as the rest of his changes deserve their own video, but also bring up some of the other changes that were brought in this video, in that video, because we need the entire context, because Belial's fallen from grace. Avatar Belial Super Skybound art has a universal change to it, where on the projectile portion of the attack, the portion that would hit you if you're too far away for the throw to connect, had its pushback on block reduced. As you can see, you were pushed pretty far away from him before. Compare that to now. Very much within range for heavies, and a little walk forward will get you close heavy punishes. Anyone got a counter of how many times I've said that in this video? Anila's Skybound art, Gilded Heaven Strike, has a reduction in its pushback on block. Previously, you were put into far heavy range. Compare that to now. You're pretty close to her now and should be able to get a close heavy, but be careful. If you do it too soon like I just did, she'll still be airborne on your punish. Even though Anila does have one other change, I am going to do my own video on her just to explore some of the ramifications, pardon my pun, about her other patch notes. While there are some changes to Siegfried's DPs, only one of them is really marked as a universal change, so that's the only one I'm going to cover in this video. Rest assured, the rest of Siegfried's changes will get their own video. So let's take a look at his ultimate DP. Previously, if you wanted to try and buffer a punish against it, the pushback on the first hit was high enough to where you would push into a far heavy range, and so if you immediately press the button, you would get your far heavy version of your normal instead of the close version that you prefer. It's made it a little awkward for you to try and punish this DP, as if you try to wait for him to get close enough to you, odds are he'd be able to block your attempt at getting a close heavy punish starter. Compare that to the new behavior. As you can see, this time I'm close enough to get my close heavy out because of the reduced pushback on the first hit of this ultimate DP, meaning that this DP is going to be riskier for Siegfried to throw out. Lastly, the pushback on his Super Skybound art has been reduced as well. Again, previously, you'd be forced into far heavy range. Say the line, mangaka. You're in range for a close heavy punish now. The only changes we'll talk about for Lucilius are with regards to the universal adjustments, which namely target both versions of his Skybound art, Axion. The pushback on block has been reduced. Previously, it was a far heavy punish. And once again, you're in range for those delicious close heavy punishes. The same applies to the U follow-up in his Axion Control, which is basically the final finishing attack that you can trigger at any moment if you use the manual version of Axion. That's the previous behavior. And now for the current behavior. Ta-da! Like other counter-attack kind of moves, 2B is now in counter-hit state in the recovery frames of her evasive maneuver. Again, making this a little risky for her, but because in mid-screen she actually disengages using this, it can be a little tricky to actually get anything meaningful off of this one. So I don't know if this particular change is going to come up too often. Note that that only applies to the backwards version of the move, as the forward version of the move doesn't have the same counter hit. Vane Skybound art also has a few changes to try and make it easier to punish on block. As you can see previously, it shoved you pretty far away. And like other Skybound arts that behave like this, think Beelzebub for example. You start within range of a far heavy attack. Or you can run in and get a close heavy. Beatrix has the same kind of change applied to her Super Skybound art. The old behavior, as you can see. And now for the new pushback. Very much within range. You'll have to get a walk forward to get a close heavy. But should be pretty easy for you to do. While Vikala is certainly going to get her own video, the one thing I have to include in here, as it is a universal change, is the reduction in pushback on the first hit of her Super Skybound art. It pretty much falls in line with the themes that we've been seeing throughout. Get a little walk forward, and you'll get a close heavy on her. That's it for discussing the system and universal mechanic changes for Granblue Fantasy vs. Rising Season 2. I wanted to document every single move that was adjusted within the parameters of the reversal change, just so there was a nice reference for it here. I'm going to be starting my work on the other characters in the patch that actually had changes applied to them, and basically kind of outline my big winners and losers as I go through those videos. First, I gotta get this uploaded, so while you're watching this, know that I'm at work on getting the rest of the characters done as well. Thanks for watching.